What if the reason financial planning feels so hard is because you're trying to predict a future that can't be predicted? Welcome back to Better Conversations. This is the podcast where we talk about life and money the way they're actually lived, not just how they look on paper. I'm Patrice Sikora with Eric Lee of Purple Wealth. And Eric, it's good to be back with you again.
Good to see you, Patrice. Thank you.
All right. Today, we're going to talk about goals and why they might actually be the problem in financial planning. Talk to me about why goal setting feels so hard for people.
Patrice, first think about that statement you made that the goals may be the problem in financial planning. Coming from a financial advisor, it's a bit strange, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're always taught that you need to have goals to have a financial plan. But just think about that question. What are your financial goals? That's the way our industry typically starts. And I've just visited with literally thousands of people over the last few decades. And that question alone not only just raises tension in the shoulder blades of people and anxiety, but it's also probably the number one reason why people feel stuck or disengaged and just dislike the financial planning process, because they do struggle with it. And it is hard to talk about goals.
Is it because they don't know what they want, or is it because maybe they just don't understand the question?
I think they understand the question, but it's a combination of factors. First of all, when we ask that question, we're asking people to tell me what their life's going to be like in 10 or 20 or 30 years, and to be specific about it.
Yes.
And nobody knows what their utility bill is going to be like in 17 and a half years, or what they're going to be doing.
Much less next year.
Right. And so this whole idea of trying to predict the future, it's really difficult for people. It's just unknowable and overwhelming. But also it's because many people just don't give themselves space and time to think about it and think about their life. You see, we co-opt other people's goals so often. We have a wealthy uncle and he did this, so we think we'll do that. Or the Joneses across the street are doing this, so we'll do that. And so people are so busy working, raising a family, focusing on their career, living their life today, that sometimes they just don't give them space. There's some space to really think about their life. And so we just accept what we should be doing. There's another important problem with asking about financial goals, because, in fact, I've got a cartoon in my desk that reminds me of this continuously. It's a cartoon, and this couple is walking down this long stairway into the dungeon of hell, and the devil's waiting at the bottom with a pitchfork. And the couple says to the devil, "We got to thinking, which would be more or less painful, coming to visit you or talking to our financial advisor?" And there's something self-deprecating about that cartoon that I like, but also it's telling us something. It's telling us something that, why is this uncomfortable to talk to your financial advisor? And I think it's just because there's a mismatch between human psychology and the traditional financial planning process, because asking about goals requires specificity, it requires numbers, and it's just not where the human mind typically lives. And so people tend to shut down or dismiss the question, or just give these vague answers of what they think they should say.
Well, you mentioned tension, and I can definitely see tension coming out of this kind of question. How do you deal with that? How do you reframe the situation so that people are willing to think about it?
The first thing is just to recognize that goals are not commitments, and to just guess.
Okay.
To just get directionally correct, take the pressure off. And as I mentioned, I don't believe most of us are wired psychologically to think in traditional financial talk. So what I mean by that is we need to shift the conversations. We need to have, pun intended here, Patrice, better conversations. That's the point of this podcast in our firm, to have better conversation. And what I mean by that is to shift the conversation to how people really think and feel about their life and their money. So rather than asking about what are your financial goals, it's usually easier for people to think about what a really good life would look and feel like in the next 5 to 10 years. Or where do you feel tension between saving and spending right now? What would you regret not doing in the next coming few years? Or even if you could, what would you do if you couldn't fail? But those kinds of questions, we're trying to understand what's important to the client, but we're shifting the feeling of the conversation from this specificity to predict the future to more where they're living in their life today, and they can visualize and understand those kinds of questions much easier.
Am I hearing the word value in here?
Values. Yeah, that's the better way to start. That's the better conversation, is that retiring at 62 with $3 million and buying a second home isn't a goal.
Okay.
It's a means to an end. Those are just tools. The real goal of that is maybe freedom, time with family, more experiences. I mean, those are values, and those are what the clients are really seeking. And the age and the number of dollars and so forth are just, how do we get there? And it's hard to predict that. The other thing about goals, though, that I think is difficult for people is that, number one, people second guess themselves all the time, and they may not admit it, but they question whether or not their goal is responsible. There's all kinds of emotions tied up in people's goals, fear, guilt, identity, family expectations. And so oftentimes clients just really aren't ready to expose themselves, to be vulnerable and be personal with a financial advisor right up front, because they have to expose a lot of underlying emotions around their life and their money that isn't necessarily comfortable. They can feel it and understand it, but they don't feel comfortable verbalizing it to the financial advisor.
Is there a process that you can use to pull that out of them? Or is it just it's time so they get to feel comfortable around you?
It's time, but it's also the recognition from our side of the table, so to speak, in the industry, that for most people, their life today is just as important as this future life we're trying to plan for. And so one of our weaknesses in our industry is we're always asking the client to defer all gratification effectively and think about this life 10 or 20, 30 years from now. And so maybe it's the couple walking into hell in my cartoon here. They don't want to come in and have this conversation about everything that they should give up and think 20 years down the road. And so from our perspective, we need to live where the client is today too. There are things happening in our clients' lives that are just as important as a retirement 20 years from now. And helping people understand what's important to them and what's most important to them is one of the key values of us as a financial advisor, of recognizing and honoring that they have things that are important to them today, and not everything is a deferred gratification out in the long term.
Do you ask them to define what is enough at that moment? Will that be enough then? Is that enough for later? Is that important?
Yeah, the whole question of enough, how much is enough, is probably another huge barrier to the idea of setting goals, because very few people have defined what enough is. How much is enough? And so when you don't define it, it's human nature to continually strive for more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more, rather than really stepping back and defining, what is this life that I really want to live? And how much is enough? And giving yourself space and permission to rethink what you're really trying to do, rather than just, again, following socially accepted standards of what you should be doing.
When you have a couple come in, do you find that they have spoken to each other about this before, or is it a new concept to them too, as a couple?
Most of the time, couples aren't aligned, and they have different values and different thoughts. And so it is a process of not changing one spouse versus the other, but just understanding from each what is important and why, and then trying to find some compromise along the way.
Okay, we'll let it sit there then. Right. Now you mentioned, well, let's go back to the concept of enough. And you mentioned time. Time, do you have enough time to do what you want? Do people take advantage of the time they have to do what they want? I'm thinking specifically of a great story you had about two couples, and they had the money and they thought they had the time, but what happened?
Well, what often happens with couples is their values are competing and clashing. And so often, and this couple in particular that I think we talked about earlier was just this couple that were facing midlife. Their kids were out of the household and had spouses and now young grandkids. And it was so important for them to get the family together, take this big family vacation to Italy. And what held them back was the money. So the values of spending time with people that they care and love about, creating memories, was clashing with this fear of writing a $60,000 check to take the whole family to Italy. They could afford it, but it was just really difficult to do. And they kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. Eventually, one of the children moved, took a different career. Time became scarce. And then Lisa ultimately had some health issues, and that further prolonged the trip, and it didn't happen. And so the point is the regret that the client felt of not getting the family together in this one last way, and now it becomes so difficult to get families together. They really regret not just taking action at the time. So the money was the focus. The money tended to be the focus of the conversation. And one of the barriers and biases, negative biases in financial planning is so often we focus on the money and that money is the scarce resource. When in fact, time needs to be given its own priority in the financial planning process, and time doesn't compound. Time doesn't expand, time disappears. And that's what you're referring to, is that in the financial planning context, focusing on time slipping away can be just as important as the money. So wasn't a bad financial decision. They ended up still secure, didn't take the trip, but certainly missed out on one of their core values.
Right. And I think you have a story about a couple that did take the family or did do that trip.
The opposite was that kind of case. Another big trip. Most of our clients are in their mid-50s, early 60s. So this is common. Adult children, they're leaving the house. Parents are oftentimes trying to hang on to the family, and grandkids are entering the picture. And this couple struggled with the same kind of issues, but did take the trip. And I asked Lisa, what was important to you about that afterwards? How was it? And it just brought tears to her eyes, and her just reflection of how precious it was and how special it was to capture those moments with the family all together. What they felt like could have been one of the last few times, because life gets so busy. And so that's where it really did pay off, and they took the action and didn't let the money hold them back.
That's great. That's absolutely great.
Yeah.
So I hear you saying, it's hard to identify goals. Life is unpredictable. Goals change. Emotion is in there. Where does financial planning come into this?
Yeah. So here I'm saying that maybe goals aren't the primary factor. How do you create a financial plan without goals? Listen, it's what we're trying to do is not create as much precision as the client might think. In other words, we're trying to reduce the rigidity of the financial planning process. We have to acknowledge that goals are going to change. Your life's going to change. Sometimes because you want it to. When your life changes, changes your money. And when your money changes, it can change your life. But the point is the constant is change. And so this idea of creating a financial plan with some set goals for 22 years in the future of how you're going to live is just not realistic. So goals change. And sometimes it's involuntary. We get health issues. There's divorces and deaths and all kinds of unfortunate circumstances that cause the financial plan to shift. But here's the point. Life is unpredictable, and planning is very important. Even though we don't know how life is going to unfold, it's not fair to let the client think that we have some mathematical precision of exactly how things are going to lay out. Our goal as financial planners is to help build flexibility into the plan and help clients begin to have conversations of trade-offs and how to adapt to change and how to think differently as you go through life, rather than a set it and forget it. Rather, planning is a continuous process, not a one-time event. So planning is important, even though we know every single plan ever created, every single financial plan ever created is wrong the day it's created. Okay? Odd to say, but every plan is wrong because life changes and life is unpredictable. And that's the point, is the goal is not to have some kind of precision of exactly what's going to happen, but instead building in flexibility and learning to have conversations about how to adapt to the constant change in your life and still make smart money moves.
You certainly sound like you enjoy this work and working with people to help them understand that things are flexible, things will change, but let's plan it anyway.
You got to start. And so often, again, I guess using a metaphor, what we're trying to do is pretend with clients sometimes in the financial planning process that we're taking a long road trip across the country. Let's imagine we're in Boston and we're going to try to drive to California. And what we always want as financial planners is precision of exactly where are you going in California, what are the GPS coordinates, and we'll dial it in and we'll get you there right on time. And the reality is clients don't know. They just know they want to go on a road trip, and they might stop off in the Black Hills of South Dakota where I am and see Mount Rushmore for a while, and they might deviate to Yellowstone, and they'll take their time and they'll get closer to California and dial in where they want to go. But that's because their life is changing and they think they want to go in a certain direction, but it's not fair for the client to have to identify they need to get to this GPS coordinate at a certain date. And we like to do that math and calculate, but that's what's happening with the clients, is they don't know exactly what GPS coordinate they want in this road trip, and they might want to stay longer in Chicago along the way or whatever, and life takes deviations. I'm that way, Patrice. I don't have a lot of finely tuned goals. I have a lot of values of what's important to me in my life. And so I don't have a date that I want to retire. I want to have the option. That's a value of mine, having the option. But I'm finding it myself in real time. I've made several financial decisions in the last year that were not in any kind of plan a year ago. I mean, they were not on the table a year ago, but life changes and presented some opportunities that if I had a financial planner would be throwing up his arms of like, what are you doing? This isn't in the plan. What are you deviating from? We had a plan, but that's the way everybody is. And so it's again about identifying a decision framework when life becomes unpredictable and things change. Just identifying a decision framework, which is a couple steps. Number one, does this match my values? Is this decision really line up with what's important to me? If it is, that's great. Check. The second question then is it realistic financially? Will it blow up my financial life if I do this? That's not difficult to figure out. And the third question is really important. Will I regret not doing it?
Ah, yes.
Will I regret it? And so as life changes, as you find opportunities along this long road trip across the country to take a detour, or you get stopped to just go through the decision framework, is what I'm considering of highest importance in my life. Can I really afford it? And would I regret not doing it? And if you can check those boxes, then the deviation is a good decision.
Wow. That's very well put. Very well put. Values, realistically, financially, and regret.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, Eric, as we wrap this up, is there anything you didn't touch on that you would like to? I mean, that's a pretty heavy note to end on.
No, just for people to take a breath. Again, this is just guess. It's okay. It's going to change. We just want to get, using my road trip analogy again, I guess, we just need to figure out which direction we're going, north, south, west, or east. Let's get on the interstate and get the speed limit. Let's get going. Let's get started. We can fine tune the coordinates on the GPS in time. But the plan, when we put in our maps and our GPS, we're so used to precision and getting it exactly right. And that's not financial planning. The point is to get your life right. To get your life right over time, not so much your initial financial plan. The plan can adapt. It's a process. It's not a noun, it's a verb. Planning is a verb. It's not a noun. And you adjust over time.
Well, folks, you've heard Eric, and if this discussion resonated with you, Eric and the team at Purple Wealth offer the Better Conversations exercise. It's a way to clarify what really matters in your life. So reach out, start the conversation, because better conversations lead to better lives. Now, contact information for Eric is in the show notes. Be sure to use it. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for listening to Better Conversations, the Life and Money podcast with Eric Lee from Purple Wealth. If this episode sparked something for you, follow the show so you never miss a conversation. You can learn more at www.purplewealth.com or reach out directly. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. Purple Wealth is a separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Any guests and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Purple Wealth. Individual tax or legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal professional. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.